Okay, hello. This is going to be the Book Troop live show for the month of August. Uh, I will give a second for people to join because I know StreamYard takes a quick second for people to join. But hello to everybody joining us. This is the Book Troop live show for the month of August, where we read Things We Do in the Dark. Whoa, English. Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. Ooh, sweet. Oh my gosh, we both have the book of the month. Love it. Amazing. Love to see it. And yeah, I am joined by my lovely friend Elizabeth over from Reading Riley. If you are unfamiliar with her channel, it'll be linked down below so you can go and check it out. And yeah, I'll just have her quickly introduce herself for anybody that doesn't know her. Maybe you can just talk about what kind of genres you typically read on your channel and like what video you've recently done that you think they should check out. Like maybe something like that.
Sure. I'm Elizabeth. My channel is Reading Riley, and I typically read horror, thriller, and then I do kind of enjoy like a speculative sci-fi aspect too. So that's probably my main things that I read. I'm obsessed with like psychological thrillers and horror and like finding out why people behave the way they do. So a lot of my channel is more geared towards like the psychology of killers
Yeah.
like that. I recently did a video where I read a few cult books.
Oh yes.
So that was really fun to kind of dive into like what makes people join cults.
Yeah.
And I just think it's interesting because nobody thinks they would be ever the person that would, but
Mm-hmm.
then people do. So where's the disconnect there?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me, Gabby.
Oh, of
I'm
course.
excited to be here.
Yes, I love that. You did a live show like a few months ago now that was like kind of talking about like the darker themes in books and things like that. And I thought that was such an interesting live show. And I love that you do more like, kind of like creative ideas like that for live show discussions. I just think that's so cool. So yeah, definitely be sure to check out her channel. It'll be linked down below. And yeah, so just to get this live show started, if you are watching in the chat, thank you so much for joining us. I would love to know if you are here because you've read the book. The beginning of this will be spoiler free, so if you've not read the book, you are more than welcome to stick around for a bit, and we will warn you before jumping into spoilers. But if you have read the book, I would love to know if you could put like a blue heart in the chat if you have read it, and then maybe if you have not yet read it, you can put a black heart in the chat just so I can get a visual to see who's all here because they've read it. Love this. BRB subscribing. Amazing. That is so kind. Thank you so much to everybody who's already saying so many nice things. Anyways, so maybe while they're doing that, would you want to give like a spoiler-free just kind of synopsis for anybody who's like unsure if they want to read this just so they can maybe know what it's about?
Sure. So this book is following Paris Peralta. She is married to Jimmy Peralta, who is a retired comedian, but who is in fact planning on getting back into it. But when we open in this book, essentially we find Paris standing over the dead body of her husband, Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a bathtub. She's got a razor in her hand, and the police are there to arrest her. And essentially, she's worried about obviously getting convicted of his murder, but she's more worried about her past coming to light. And so this story is really about her kind of confronting the secret past that she has. There's also another woman, Ruby Reyes, who is getting out of jail for a similar murder that happened in Toronto in the 90s. And she is threatening to expose Paris's past life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the general gist. A lot of like secret past talk, a lot of generational trauma. And yeah, I guess that's how I would sum it up.
Yeah, no, that was really perfect. When I first picked up this book, I only read like the top little section because I feel like a lot of times like thrillers these days will kind of like I don't know, like spoil something that's coming up. So I really didn't even know like when I was getting into this book about like the second half of the description. So I was like totally surprised by some things that were happening a little bit later on in the story.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. Oh,
Love
thank
that.
you.
Amazing. So kind.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, yeah, I think that was the perfect synopsis to give for the book. I I was gonna see if I want to know anything before we talk about our ratings, but I feel like at this point it would be a good time to get that out of the way. So let's do in the chat. If you have read the book, I would love to know what you rated this book out of 5. I feel like from what I've seen on like the Discord and like my Instagram, I've seen a lot of really mixed feelings towards this one. I feel like people are either really loving it or really hating it. There seems like there's a lot of people also like in the middle. So this one's just all over the board from what I've seen, and I'm so curious and excited and nervous to hear your rating for
Hey,
it.
I have no
Um,
idea what you think of it either.
yeah, yeah. We both pretty much just finished this book within the last couple of days here. Like, pretty much, I think we both read it within the last week or so. So it's pretty fresh in our minds. And I think because of that, I haven't heard what you rated it and vice versa. So we're excited. Okay, so go ahead, take it away. I want to know what you rated it.
Okay, so I think where I'm landing with this one is where I typically land with Jennifer Hillier books, and I'm giving it 4 stars.
Okay, nice. And what's your like reason for it without too much spoilers or anything? Just kind of like a
Um, well, I really love how she structures her chapters. She does
Mhm.
this a lot where she like um at the end of a chapter, she likes to have a little reveal, you know. And
Mhm.
this one, some of the reveals weren't as shocking to me, but I do feel like there were a good amount of twists in there, and it kept me entertained.
Yeah.
Um, I caught on to some of them though faster than I was supposed to,
Mhm.
but I still really enjoyed this. I think it was a good story, and I like where she went with it. And I think it does have a little bit more kind of social commentary than some of our other books. So I appreciate it. I think it's a solid read.
Yeah.
What about
Nice.
you? What did you give it?
Okay. This is where I feel really bad because I think I'm giving it 1 star.
No! Oh no!
I
That's
know.
gonna be fun.
I am shocked that I disliked this as much as I did because I've really loved most of Jennifer Hillier's stuff in the past. I've never given one of her books lower than 4 star, so I was sure that I was going to love this. And then for most of the book, I was planning on giving it 2 stars because I was just like, I mean, it's fine, whatever. And like you said, I was able to predict a lot of like where the story was going and what the twists were. But then like by the end, I was just like so frustrated. And I just ended up giving it 1 star. Now I feel so bad.
All right. All right.
Oh my gosh.
Spoilers, because I want to know what you hated about this. So what you
This is what I mean. I feel so bad that I didn't like it.
canceling, Gabby.
Oh my god. I know. I feel like this is surprising because I feel like I should have loved this, but I just I couldn't. But I'm glad though that you liked it because I like having different opinions on the live show because I like that you'll be able to represent some of the people in the chat that are probably going to be really mad at me.
Yeah, it definitely makes the chat more interesting.
That's what I mean. So, okay, well, cool. Got that out of the way. Um okay, so I guess just to the first question I want to ask that's still kind of like spoiler free is because in this book we not only get Paris's point of view, but we also do get the point of view of like Drew's character at times, and then even like Ruby's character at times. And I guess I just want to ask, like, did you have a preference for like which character you enjoyed reading from the most, or like which I guess yeah, like which character you enjoyed reading from the most, or did you enjoy the switch up of point of views, or would you have preferred for this book to be more told from like one of their point of views?
I actually liked the switch up of point of views. I don't think that there was one that I didn't like or liked more than the others. At that first, when it goes to part 2 and we switch perspectives to Drew, at
Mhm.
first I was like a little disoriented, like, wait,
Yeah.
what is happening? And then you kind of have to like build your relationship with that character again, like start from scratch, you know?
Mhm.
So there was a few minutes there where I was like, what?
Yeah.
I did end up enjoying Drew's perspective as well, although I feel like we could have gotten more from Drew, to be honest. Um, but yeah, I liked how this was split up into like I think it's like 6 parts,
Yeah.
and we get kind of different perspectives.
Mhm.
I'm like now that I know your rating, I'm going back in my head like, okay, what didn't she like? What? Hey, the first line of this book.
Oh my God. Yeah. I was going to say the first line is one of my favorite first lines, I think.
Can I just read this real quick? The first line is, there's a time and a place for erect nipples, but the back of a Seattle police car definitely isn't it. Like, she's so good at sucking you in.
I know, like that is a banger of a first line. And honestly, like after I read that first line, I was like, okay, we're here for a wild ride. Like, let's go. So I agree. The first line is pretty great. And I do think, like, I will say if there was anything I was gonna praise about this book, it would be the first part of this book. Because since it is divided into 6 parts, I think the first part of this book was the strongest part for me. It was the part of the book where I was the most invested in the story, just because I gravitated more towards Paris's story and like what was happening. Like I was the most intrigued by that in this book out of all the different storylines that were happening. And then I just personally feel like, like not spoilers or anything yet, but I just feel like as the story went on, the story relied too much on flashbacks for me that I just did not care about. And I just felt like the story really dragged after it hit part 2, because we change point of views and then we get sucked into this past. And I feel like the story just really like derailed from what I thought it was going to be about. Like, I don't know. So that's kind of like the gist of, without giving any spoilers for like some of the issues that I had with it. But
interesting.
yeah, I'm trying to think of what else we could mention before jumping into spoilers, just because I feel like with this book, it's kind of like almost difficult to talk about in a way without getting into
Yeah. I'm curious, because you said you listened to the audio and read the book.
Yeah.
Did you listen to the part at the end of the audio with the interview with Jennifer Hillier?
I didn't know. I cut it off before that.
It was actually really good.
Yeah.
There's like a podcaster that does an interview or like a back and forth with Jennifer Hillier, and she talks about like what inspired her to write the book and what she was wanting to get across from the book. And I thought that was like really insightful as to like, especially after having just finished the book, to like think about like what and I just love Jennifer Hillier as a person. I think she's so great and she's funny. And I pictured Paris as Jennifer Hillier.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. That's so great.
Yeah.
I know. I do adore Jennifer Hillier so much too. I think she seems like a really cool person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to go back and listen to that actually, because I do remember it being at the end, but I was just so frustrated by like the end of the book. I was like, shut it off.
Oh man. Sorry you had such a bad experience.
I know. Oh my God.
I will say though that I did not love the audiobook narrator.
Yeah.
I thought her accents, there's one detective that's like a Brit.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not British, and I like to think that I'm good at accents, but I'm actually terrible. But I think her British accent was way off. And if anybody in the chat is in the UK or that area and has listened to the audio, let me know if it was accurate or not, because it felt wrong.
Yeah.
And it was really slow. She read it really slowly. So I was able to listen to it at like, I know you listen to audiobooks a lot faster than I do, but I had it at like 1.8 or 2 times speed, and it just felt like normal. It didn't even feel fast because it was like slow narration.
I agree. Yeah. I know it wasn't my favorite audiobook narration either, but yeah, I did notice that too, actually, now that you say it, that she did read it a little bit slower than I guess what I'm mostly used to with audiobook narrators.
I always wonder if that's a personal choice on the part of the actor, or if it's the director or producer that's like telling them, no, slow down, you're going too fast.
I know. I don't know how that works with like recording audiobooks. Oh yeah, I guess too, before we jump into spoilers, we could mention like if the podcast element, did you feel like that was necessary for the story, or do you feel like, because like I almost feel like it's to a point where now every book just has a podcast just for the sake of having a podcast, and I don't always think it's totally necessary to tell the story. But how did you feel about the like podcast element of this story?
Yeah, the podcast element is kind of not really existent. I mean, there's not if I have a podcast in my books, I want it to be, especially with the audio, I want it to be fully produced, like a real podcast. That's what I love about it. So I've read so many books lately that have teased that, just like you're saying. And it's like, I'm not getting what I want from that. I want it to be like a full-on production of like final product.
Yeah.
I just read The Last Housewife too, and that also had a podcast element, but again, and that was a little bit closer to what I was looking for, but I wish it was more of like the interviews being recorded as opposed to the final product. I want that final product. And I
Yeah.
love podcasts in my books, and that absolutely draws me to a book. But yeah, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I would have preferred alternating chapters of like the final product and go
Yeah.
to that story of Ruby Reyes. Is that her name? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
think
know.
if she had done it like that, that might have changed your opinion since you didn't like the flashbacks. They could have done the flashbacks as the audio as the podcast.
That's what I mean. I feel like the podcast could have been more utilized. Like it felt to me like the podcast was just like thrown in there for the sake of like making Drew have a reason to like yeah, dig for answers like Amanda just said. Where I just feel like it could have been used in a much more interesting way though. You know, like you said, like maybe having like yeah, instead of these like boring flashback chapters that are just like endless, we could have had that instead as like, oh, it's a cool podcast like bit from the transcript or something. And I was gonna compare it to like the Last Housewife, like what you just said, because I feel like I just read the Last Housewife too, and I feel like they're actually a lot more similar than I was anticipating. Like not only with, I mean, we'll have. I'll probably save some of that for the spoilery discussion because I did find them to be actually quite similar. But yeah, I don't know. These days, I feel like there's a lot of books that they just like the idea of having the true crime podcast in the book because then I think a lot of authors think it'll make it more relatable or more like interesting, you know, for their stories. But I just wish it was yeah, like utilized more, I guess.
It's trendy to do it now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like most books these days are pitched as like true crime podcasts, like you know, it's like in the title, like pitching it as like a reason to read it. So
Yeah,
um
I felt neutral about it too. Like I like that comment. I didn't love it, but it didn't bother me either. So
yeah. Okay. This is interesting. I think it would have been stronger if the podcaster was someone who didn't know Ruby personally. It just felt unnecessary because Drew already knew the case.
hmm.
That's interesting. I just feel like I mean, at least Drew had like a legitimate reason, I guess, to want to do the podcast. But yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyways, I think we are going to jump into the spoilery section now just because I think that's most of what I wanted to cover outside of spoilers. And so, if you have not yet read the book, we are going to now be jumping into all of these spoilers. So, you have been warned. If you haven't read the book, or if you just, you know, don't want to hear spoilers, then now would be the time. Thank you so much for joining us this far. And yeah, so I guess, well, first question I want to ask that maybe is kind of spoilery, but maybe not, is like how does this book compare to other Jennifer Hillier books for you, or which ones have you read, and how does this one compare, like in ratings and feelings?
Okay, so I've read Little Secrets. I've read Wonderland. I have read Jar of Hearts,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's it. And this one, I think four.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sweet.
I definitely stylistically I see that comparison as far as like how I said before about how she sets up her chapters. She likes to have a little reveal at the end of the chapter, and it kind of actually reminds me of John Mars a little bit. The way
Mm-hmm.
she does it. She likes to have like these chapters where they end and it's like, oh, by the way, this.
Yeah.
So I see that similarity. This one as compared to the other ones, and they did discuss this actually in that kind of interview at the end, but this one has more characters that you kind of get deeper into. You get into like this generational trauma
Mhm.
between Paris and her mother, and then you find out her mother's mother like is a bad mom too, and so you
Yeah.
have that kind of flowing down through the generations. I liked that aspect, and I do feel like this one was more kind of like family oriented and
Mhm.
less super twisty, but also it had quite a few reveals in there.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I think we've mostly read the same ones. I've read Little Secrets too. I've read Jar of Hearts, and then most recently I just read The Butcher at the beginning of August.
I
Um
want to read that one.
yeah, that one I gave Jar of Hearts 5 stars, I gave The Butcher 5 stars, and then I gave Little Secrets 4 stars. And so I've enjoyed like pretty much every single book that I've read from her so far. So I thought maybe she would be like one of those guaranteed authors that I just like love everything from, which rarely ever happens for me. But yeah, so but I do agree that I like her writing style, how like yeah, I agree how she sets up her chapters really interesting and how she closes her chapters in a really interesting way. It almost kind of reminds me of like Lucy Folly too in a way. Like I love the way she closes her chapters with like a little bit of intrigue or like something to keep you interested in like going to the next chapter. But yeah, I do agree with what you said about how this one feels different in a sense because it feels more like a family, oriented kind of story, which is maybe like why, like looking back on it, maybe why I had an issue with it, I guess, just because, um, like I said, I think part one was the strongest part of this book. And I think the most interesting aspect of this book to me was trying to figure out what happened to Paris's husband and who, like, because there was a lot of speculation around like, did he kill himself or did somebody kill him? Was there a murderer? And that aspect of the book was the most intriguing to me. Like, if I had to pick a section of the book that I cared about the most, it was definitely like me trying to figure out like if Paris was responsible. I felt like it would be too obvious that Paris would be the one responsible for what happened to her husband, but that
Yeah.
part of the book just really intrigued me. And then I feel like as soon as we hit part two, the story just really derailed into like Drew's storyline talking about this girl Joey from the past and with Ruby. And it was just like I didn't care as much. Like I don't know why I didn't care about Drew. I didn't care about Joey like in the past, and then reading about the trauma that she went through with her mom was just super like upsetting, and I was just like frustrated. And I get that that's probably the point, maybe, is you're supposed to feel those things obviously when reading about that, but it was just like tough. Like I really just didn't care that much, and I wanted to get back to the story about Paris. And I just feel like that whole story with Paris and the husband just got completely pushed to the side to like tell this story about the past that I just didn't really care about anymore. And so that's mainly like I think why I ended up being so frustrated with the book, is because it ended up feeling like something that I wasn't really anticipating, but like not in the best way.
Yeah.
um
Did you guess that Paris was Joey?
I did, yeah. I
Mm.
was wondering too if you had guessed that or how you felt about that twist.
Yeah, I feel like I've been reading a lot of books lately with that twist, and I typically do enjoy that twist, but I think that's part of the reason why I saw it coming. The
Yeah.
second she was like talking about Ruby Reyes, and she was like, "I killed her daughter all of these
Yeah.
years ago," I was like, "It's her." And then I
Yeah.
started like theorizing, and they kept talking about how Jimmy was 30 years, like almost 30 years older than her, and I was like, "Okay, let me do the math,"
I
because
know.
she was talking about how her mom was convicted in the 90s. I think it was like 92, she was 13. So I was like, okay, she's 92, she's 92, she's 13, which makes her 43. Jimmy was 68, which makes him 25 years older. It's her.
Yes,
So I know
exactly.
it is.
I thought there were so many obvious signs too that was like literally pointing out the fact like they are the same person, and I thought it was so obvious. That's why when the twist finally came that like Drew finally realized like, oh my god, like Paris is Joey, I was like, finally you caught up, bro. Like let's go. Because
I
yeah, I
think
agree.
that one that was like revealed in part two though. So it was a pretty
It
early
was.
reveal. I
Yeah,
think.
that's why I thought there was still hope, because I was like, okay, that's not the big twist. Like there's still gonna be something coming. Um, but yeah, I agree. Like as soon as Paris said, like, oh, because I killed her daughter, I was like, wait, what? And then as soon as we went into Drew's section and he started talking about this girl Joey in his past, I was like doing the math and I was like, what are the chances that Paris could be Joey? Like I started to think that, and then it was like there was a part where Ruby said something like, or no, it was the part where sorry, they thought Joey and the other stripper girl were like identical. They kept saying they
Yes.
look so identical, and I was like, obviously she's the one who died. Like what?
Yeah. And then they mentioned Drew mentioned that he saw her butterfly tattoo, and I was like, how is she going to explain that? And then later on, she's like, and we have matching
No,
tattoos.
I was like, that's convenient.
And that was the like hook, line, and sinker for me. So
Yeah.
like you have that reveal that Joey is Paris. Then you have the reveal that she switched the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the reveal that um what is her name? Elise was the one that
Yeah.
killed Jimmy. And then the last reveal at the end is when we find out that Paris Joey actually did kill
Yeah.
Charles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which none of those shocked me. I never had a moment where I was like, you
Yeah.
know, but there was enough in there, enough reveals that it kept my interest throughout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know, I agree that the ending with Elise being the one who had killed him, I was so disappointed by it because I literally wrote my first prediction that was like in part 1, I put Elise killed him. Like it was my first like thought because I was like she just seemed a little bit too like aggressive in wanting to push the fact that it was a suicide or something. Like I don't know, she just kept I felt like she was trying too hard to be like, "No, you guys, like you don't understand. It was a suicide." Like I was just immediately like sus of her. I was like, "Nah." And so I didn't trust her. So that twist was like probably my most disappointing because was
Mhm.
it was saved for like the end. And then I was like, I really thought there was going to be something that would shock me at the end of this book. And then when it was revealed that Elise did it, I was not only mad because I thought that was so freaking obvious, but then I was mad because the reason she did it, I thought was so dumb. I was so mad because I'm
That she
like,
loved him, that she
yeah,
couldn't have him.
yeah, and she's like, "Well, I've loved him for all these years, and I was just, like, jealous that you had him, and then it was an accident," or whatever. Because she's, like, waving the knife around, and
Yeah, that's a little bit far-fetched because it hit him right in
I
the
know,
femoral artery in his leg.
that's what I mean, I'm like, "What?" Like, I have trouble visualizing that anyways, but it's also just, like, it seems so, like, outlandish for this to be, like, the way that it went down, and, like, the way she noticed it too at the end, the way she was like, "Oh, well, we only had 3 knives in the drawer, and now there's 4," or whatever, and she
Yeah.
noticed that one got put back. I was like, "Bitch, what? Like, what?" It was just a
I see
little
what you're saying, I see what you're saying. I definitely like, you're making sense.
it was a little much.
I my only gripe, like, as I was reading it, and, like, now that you're talking about that, like, yeah, that does make sense. As I was
Mhm.
reading, my only gripe was her interaction with Ruby at the end when Ruby tries to push her into the lake and how they, like, caught it on camera, but they couldn't see the check.
Yeah,
That was a bit of a stretch for me.
yeah. I know
Sh
that whole thing with, Ruby at the end was a little bit like, "What is happening?" Because, I mean, in a way, like, I totally respect, everything that happened with Joey, and, like, I actually really do respect the whole way that Joey went about the situation with, like, locking up Ruby, like, how we got to see that, like, flashback of, like, how Ruby was basically trying to manipulate her into being like, "Oh, don't tell the court," or w no, she was trying to get her to tell the courts that Charles was, like, emotionally abusive and, like, sexually abusive towards her so that she could have justification for like killing him or whatever, right? And then she would get like a lighter sentence because it would be like self-defense. But like I actually really respect that Joey was like, nah, like she went in the courts and she was like, nope, he was like the nicest guy ever, whatever. And then her, Ruby gets locked up for like literally forever. Like I actually really respected her for that because I was like, do it. But
Yeah.
but yeah, but then that whole ending scene when she like brings her the $1 million check and then Ruby's like, I demand more, and then she's like, nobody's gonna believe you, and she just like tears it up. I was just like, what am I reading right now?
And then she pushes her into the pond and she can't swim. I don't necessarily believe that she can't swim. Like, she has to live in a mansion, they have a pool.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that she can't swim. Although I've always been a swimmer, so I don't really understand when people can't swim. It's like you're just making it easy for someone to kill you. You need to learn to swim. Like
Yeah.
that's the easiest way to kill somebody if you can't swim. Just a simple little push like that
Mm,
to swim. Like just do it for yourself. Do it for your safety. But like
exactly.
I understand that's like a huge um that can be like an economic divide sometimes too, because a lot of times
Mhm.
people from like poor backgrounds cannot, they don't have access to swimming pools and things like that. So that makes sense. But
Yeah,
like as an adult, especially if you're rich and you're living with this man, you clearly have a pool. Teach yourself to swim. Get a tutor. You can
true.
afford it.
I know. I think that has a lot to do about like where you live too, because I know like there's some places where like learning how to swim would probably not really be beneficial to you depending on where you live, but
That's true. That's very true.
mhm.
But as far as like the abuse and stuff, I think that's what really I enjoyed about this. Not like enjoyed, but like
Yeah.
um I respect it
Mhm.
because when we talk about how Joey was just put through so much as a kid
Yeah.
by this mom, and the fact that she was a bad mom because her mom was a bad mom. We talk about this generational trauma that's going through. And even Jennifer Hillier says in her interview that like Ruby was unredeemable. Yes,
Mm,
she was probably abused as a kid too. But you pass a certain point. As far as like carrying that on,
mhm.
it's not your fault that it happened to you, but it's your responsibility to like not push that down to the next generation, you know? And
Yeah.
so I felt like Paris was like I'm not going to, like, this is where it ends, you know? And the fact that I thought it was going to go when she lied and said that Charles didn't abuse her. I
Mhm.
thought it was going to go into something with Charles's daughter, because Charles had a daughter.
Oh.
I thought by her saying he didn't, like, it
Mm.
was gonna put his daughter in trouble, because like, he might have what did he do to his own daughter, you know?
Yeah.
What if her saying that, like, got his actual daughter into trouble, where she was trying to admit to it one day that he had abused her, and this kind of, like, made her not believable or
Yeah.
something, you know?
Like, it invalidated something that she might
Yeah.
have said.
I thought
Yeah.
it would take it there, but it didn't. But, as far as, like, Ruby and her relationship with Paris/Joey, um, I did feel like that was kinda like an F you, like, that was, like, well deserved, because she
Yeah.
was not protecting her because she found out that he had hurt her daughter. She
Mhm.
was jealous, and so
Yeah.
that distinction between, like, that motherly instinct to protect and just being jealous of your actual daughter is
Yeah.
so messed up.
Ugh, I know. Those scenes of just, like, reading about Ruby and all of the, like, harmful, toxic things that she would put on her daughter, like, that was just so hard to read about, and I really feel like so much of this book, at least for me, got really bogged down by these flashback chapters just trying to emphasize, like, how terrible and shitty of a mother she was. I was like, "I don't need more of this." Like, I understand, like, I feel like in a lot of the parts, like, especially towards the middle of the book, it was just constant, like, this is what she did this one year, and it was so awful and terrible, and then, this is how she fucked up Joey's life in this way, and, like, it was just so hard to read, and, um, just Ruby's character was, yeah, she was irredeemable, just, like, so awful to read about, and so I don't feel bad for what happened with her at the end. I was kind of, like, rooting for Joey at that point at the end because it was like, ugh.
Because even though Ruby didn't actually kill Charles, she thought she did, and she intended to.
Mhm.
She intended to, and then she thought she did. So, like, she should have gone to jail anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but the fact that Paris is the one that actually, like, finished him off, I think I liked that part of it,
Mhm.
because her mom is the worst, but she was, like, standing up for herself. She's like, "I am ending this. Like, I'm finally fighting back." And there's all these creepy guys in her life. The poor, like, and her uncle that
I
was,
know.
like, being creepy.
Yeah. That too. That was so, like,
I don't like that. I don't like that. But,
Mhm.
like, it is sad. You're right. It's sad. She's just, like, constantly surrounded by these people. And then when her um grandma, was it her grandma that burned all of her books? I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, no. Oh, hell no, you didn't just burn all her books."
My
I would have
god.
lost it. Like, that is
Mhm.
no, no. She is the worst.
I was curious, at any point in this book, were you, like, shipping Drew and Joey together? Like, were you, like, rooting for them to get together in the end, or did you have any, like, feelings towards, like, that kind of romantic plot that was happening?
Yeah, I did. I wanted them to get together. I like a romance subplot in my thrillers.
I agree. I think that's actually something Jennifer Hillier in particular is really good at. Because if I remember correctly, in Jar of Hearts, there was, like, a really big romantic theme or element happening in that one. I can't remember specifically because 'cause it's been a minute, but I feel like in her books, she's good at writing, like, romance that I actually care about, like, at least in The Butcher too, there was, like, a side kind of romantic thing happening that I was like, "Okay." So, I feel like that's something she's actually really good at is, writing these kind of, like, romantic plots that it's not too heavy though of romance, it's just kind of, like, there on the side, you know?
Yeah, and, like, they didn't really specify whether they ended up together.
I
They
know.
clearly
See,
they, like
that's what I mean. I wanted more closure there because I was shipping it for this book, and now I need to know, like, are they together? Like, are they not? Like,
yeah, they, like, definitely strengthened their relationship, and they addressed a lot of the things that they were missing and miscommunicating on in the past, but they didn't, like, have a happily ever after, you know?
yeah.
I was
Well,
thinking maybe, like, there could be a sequel.
mhm.
He doesn't really do sequels.
I totally agree with that, that I liked them together, but he was kind of judgy about her being a stripper. I hated that. Yeah, that one conversation they had, I was like, "Drew, you better sit down." Um, but yeah, I agree. I do think he cared about Joey a lot. Um,
That scene was really tense when they went back to Joey's perspective about that night when
mhm.
Drew and his friends were at the strip club
Yeah.
and for his bachelor party. That was really tense for me because I would have been, I don't know how I would have handled that if I like saw this guy that like she clearly like thought they would end up together and then he's there for his bachelorette party and
Oh,
she's like working all these guys and he comes out of the back and she's like you know
oh, I
that
know.
stressful.
That's so tense. Like, oh my God, can you imagine just like seeing someone that you used to be with in that way? Like, that would be so awkward.
I don't know
Uh,
that she had been with him. I think they had this kind of
oh yeah,
unrequited.
that's right. They had been like roommates or something before, right? Or just
He was
friends. And
with that other girl. And
yeah,
then they broke up, and then he got some other girl pregnant, and they were gonna get married, but they never did, and I don't know.
just a whole mess.
Yeah, it was kind of like a nobody understands me like you do kind of thing, but we never got there.
Yeah, interesting. I did have because I mentioned earlier that this book felt really similar to The Last Housewife to me in a way, just because of the whole like, I feel like both of these books are similar because they had this like podcast element to them where I mean, I feel like in The Last Housewife the podcast element was a little bit better utilized, at least in my opinion, than this one. But they both had that, and then they also both had this like sex, like I mean, that book had the sex cult, which was like hella intense to read about, but this
Yeah.
one also had these scenes at like the strip club where it's like these men are being, really gross and she's having to do things for money, and they just kind of reminded me of each other a lot in those ways because I was like, I feel like I just read a book like this where there's like some kind of gross sex things to read about, and then it's like a podcast element, and they just really
Yeah.
reminded me of a lot of each other in that way. um
Yeah, I can definitely see those parallels.
yeah.
Especially that her old friend is the podcaster.
Yeah, exactly. That too. It's like I don't know, I feel like there's trends in thrillers recently that I'm seeing. That's no spoilers by the way for The Last Housewife. That's all stuff that's mentioned um in the premise, but yeah, I just found them to be very similar, and um I just thought that was interesting. I know you said I wanted to ask if there are any other kind of like books or TV shows or movies that this one kind of reminded you of or that you would recommend if you liked something like this.
Yeah, so actually I have a couple.
Yeah.
The first one, I don't know, actually, I don't know if you've read these. I think you've read at least one of these. The first one is The Violence,
Ooh.
by Delilah S. Dawson. And this one, it's a little bit of a chunker. It's a little bit of a slow burn,
Uh-huh.
but this one is about a plague that happens called the violence. And instead of it making you sick, it makes you violent and you don't see it
Ooh.
coming. And when it comes on, you just kill whoever's nearest to you. And so you can imagine the implications if you kill somebody that you really love, etc. And
Yeah.
the comparison for this one is that we're following 3 generations of women who have all dealt with abuse.
Oh,
And
okay.
the main character is the mom, and then we follow her daughter and her mother.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a journey. It's
Yeah.
like her journey. The mother, she's being abused, and so she thinks, well, maybe I can turn in my husband and claim that he has the violence because he's violent anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe that's how I can get out of this situation. But that's just the beginning of the story. Like this whole story is not just about that. It goes on into like this kind of self-discovery and having this liberation for all 3 of these women. So that's one of them, and I feel like it's kind of got some parallels there.
Nice. I know that one's on my TBR. I keep hearing about that one.
It is
Sounds
a slow burn. It's not like a super fast, twisty thriller. So just keep that in mind if you go into it. And the other
yeah.
one, I want to say you've read this one, Gabby, but I'm not sure. Burning Girls by
Ooh,
CJ.
yeah. Yeah.
And this one follows a mother and daughter,
Mm.
and the mother also has like a secret past.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I drew the comparison for this one. But this one's got some like creepy paranormal vibes, and it's got like church, almost like is it satanic vibes? Is it not? And it's
Yeah,
like small town, and CJ Tudor's writing is just amazing. She's
amazing.
incredible. That's the other
Yeah.
one.
That's a really interesting comparison. Like, I don't think I would have thought of that because that's so true. Like, CJ Tudor's writing is really good in that one. I think that's my favorite CJ Tudor.
Yeah, I CJ Tudor's writing reminds me of like I call her the Diane Sawyer of thriller writers because
Yeah.
she is super classy and she is just her writing is so poised and effective and smart. It's just smartly written. So she's
Yeah,
like the Diane Sawyer of thriller writers.
that's so cool. I love that. Yeah, Burning Girls is great. And the violence does sound so interesting. Like, I love that premise so much.
There's like some like humor in there too. Like it's not all super heavy. There are some like humorous parts and it goes in an interesting direction. It's very much like a journey.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. Okay, I think we'll probably wrap this up in a few minutes here. I'm trying to think of anything else specifically that I wanted to talk about with this book. So if you have anything else in the chat that you would love for us to discuss before we wrap up this live show, then please let us know. But yeah, I was just gonna look over my notes real quick. I think I mentioned pretty much everything. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention that you haven't yet?
Um Not necessarily. I think oh, you mentioned that you may have recognized some of the places where it's set in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's so cool because most of Jennifer Hillier's books take place in Seattle, and she just writes like it's so cool because since I've moved to Washington now, I recognize a lot of the like little local towns or places that she mentions. Like she even mentions towns like Bellevue and Marysville, which are a little bit outside of Seattle, but they're definitely like places that I recognize and stuff. So I do love that about her books. Like I always think it's cool when books take place kind of in your area and you can be like, "Ooh, I know where that is."
Yeah, The Last Housewife was like that for me because she lives in Dallas when it starts out.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yeah, it's always fun when you have that little extra element and you can like recognize places. And so I was wondering how that experience was for you. But it's also set in Toronto too, and part of
Yeah.
the
I know. I think this author, I think she's actually located in Toronto now or something.
I
Or
think you're right. I think you're right.
yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I love though that her books take place in Seattle just because I feel like Seattle's such a I don't know, like easy to imagine and visualize like location for book settings. Like I always love when books take place in Seattle.
I
But
have never been, but I would love to visit Seattle someday. I think it
gosh,
seems like such a cool place.
it is. It is really nice. Okay, well, I wanted to wrap it up with asking, I'm sure because you did rate this one higher, I would ask, would you read Jennifer Hillier books in the future? And what is something maybe you'd want to see from her in the future? Like
Huh,
maybe some kind of trope maybe she hasn't done, or, you know, something like that.
interesting. I okay. I yes, of course, I would read her again in the future. She is one of those authors that I will always read from. Jennifer Hillier, Karen Slaughter, um, who else? Ruth Ware. Normally, I haven't read
Mhm.
that girl yet though because I'm scared because I've heard bad reviews.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah, Mona Awad is another one.
Mhm.
But yeah, she's definitely an author that I would automatically buy.
Yeah,
Um, but something that I would like to see her do, that's a tricky question.
I know. I don't mean to
I
put
wouldn't
you on the spot.
I wouldn't mind seeing her take on the, like, creepy child trope.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, I wouldn't mind well, see, I don't expect her to get into more, like, weird stuff, but I like weird stuff.
Yeah,
Um, like The Last House on Needless Street, like Bunny, like,
yeah,
um, I'm thinking of ending things like that type of weird. I
yeah,
would love it if she tried to, like, delve into something that was maybe a little bit more surrealistic or something like that.
yeah. I agree, that would be super interesting, or to even get her to write something that's, like, a little bit more on the horror side, like or, like, teetering between thriller, horror would be interesting.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
yeah, that's awesome. I saw a good question in the chat that I wanted to talk about. Do thrillers have to be twisty or surprising to truly be thrillers? And if you guess the twist, are you still thrilled? I think
Oh,
that's like a really interesting conversation that I think honestly could probably be its own like live show discussion topic because I do think there's so much to that question and like, can you still enjoy thrillers if you're not surprised by elements? Like even that conversation is like, you know, interesting.
mhm.
I don't know.
I can. I think, like, sometimes they're set up so that you can kind of pick up the clues along the way, and I do still have
Mhm.
something that happens,
Yeah.
although nothing hits me as hard as when I have that gasp moment where I, like, gasp out loud. If I gasp out loud, usually it's, like, automatic 5-star for me because if it
Yeah.
a visceral audible response, like,
Yeah.
that's what really does it for me. And I think thrillers in general, what I expect, like, from thrillers is that it's gonna have a little bit of a faster pace, is
Yeah.
that it's gonna have more twists in there, as opposed to, like, where horror is, it can be a little bit slower. It can
Mhm.
be a little bit more haunting. Um, but yeah, I do expect thrillers to be fast paced. That's definitely one element that I expect from a thriller.
Yeah. I know, I think definitely when it comes to, like, expectations for thrillers, I definitely have the expectation of, like, wanting to be surprised and, like, wanting to be thrilled because that's pretty much the main reason why I'm reading thrillers is because I want to be, like, floored by a plot twist, but I do agree that I don't think you necessarily have to have plot twists that shock you in order to enjoy a thriller. Like, just for example, The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier is one that I just read by her, and that book also didn't really have anything that like super shocked me. It was just a really entertaining story for me. Like I liked all the like little twists and turns it took along the way and I liked following the characters and like their situations were just so entertaining and like insane to me that it was like so interesting. But I don't know, I guess with this one it was just it I didn't care as much about it and that's why I think I ended up getting mad that not only did I not care but I also wasn't surprised. I was able to predict everything. So like there just wasn't as much enjoyable things for me in this one, but I totally think that you can enjoy a thriller without being surprised by it, it
Yeah.
really depends on the book for me though.
I think The Butcher, I haven't read it, but it's one of those that where it's like kind of reveals at the beginning,
Yeah,
and then
that's
you
what I
kind
mean.
of backtrack and figure out how you got there.
Yeah, it's like it's not a shock of like who the butcher is because you know that almost like right away in the first chapter, but it's almost like getting to see how this impacts the other characters and how the story is able to unfold and how they start to like piece together the dots is just like really entertaining for me. Like it's almost like Breaking Bad in a way where they're starting to like like put together the pieces and it's just so like so entertaining. So
I need to read that one.
yes. I don't mind if I guess most of the twists, but I usually almost always have at least one. That's what I mean too. Like if I can guess some of the twists, but there's at least one that surprises me, then it's like I can have a good time too.
Mhm. If it's
Um,
at the right place, though, like there was a twist in They Never Learn. I felt like the big twist in that one came right in the middle of the book.
yeah,
And that disappointed me because the second twist didn't really hit me. That one hit me, but then I had nowhere else to go for the rest of the book. So if
yeah,
it's gotta be in the right spot too.
yeah. I agree. I know. I was gonna say, I think part of the reason too why this book in particular I wanted to rate like lower than I probably would have otherwise is just because it had a lot of tropes in thrillers that I'm usually not a big fan of, and one of those is the twist that someone from the past is actually the same person that you're reading about in the present. Like I'm not a huge fan of that trope or twist. Like it's always annoying to me because most of the time I can predict it and it's just like okay, whatever. Like
Yeah.
and then also the twist or I guess it's not a twist, but like the trope of like someone blackmailing someone else as like one of the main thrilling elements in the story. That's one of my least favorite thriller tropes just because blackmailing is just like not that exciting of something for me to read about. Like I don't know why. It's just like whenever there's like a blackmail storyline in a thriller, I immediately get like 10 times less interested than I was before. So I
Mhm.
feel like those are just tropes or things in thrillers that this had a number of things that I was just like, okay, I don't care for that. So
Yeah,
uh
I used to love, and I still do enjoy the twist that the the person is the same other person, that kind of
yeah,
like, oh, it's the same person twist.
yeah,
Um, but like the first couple that I read with that, I was like so floored and like,
yeah,
oh my God, it blew me away. But the more of those that I read, now I'm starting to be able to pick up on the clues
yeah,
when that's happening.
yeah.
So it's less thrilling, but I typically still enjoy that twist.
Mhm.
But I see what you're saying about the blackmail twist for sure. It's
Yeah.
not really a whole lot of places you can take that.
Mhm. Well, that's what I mean. Like, usually once you find out it's like a blackmail situation, I feel like the story, for the most part, at least in my mind, comes pretty straightforward about like what's going to end up happening next with that kind of
Mm.
thing. But yes, I mean, I know it happens in real life, but it doesn't make it any less exciting. Yeah, honestly. um,
Yeah, Jennifer Hillier actually also mentioned that, like, as a thriller writer, she's constantly trying to set up these situations in a way that's believable versus
mhm.
the stuff that happens in real life is sometimes like way more out there than the stuff
Yeah,
that we're reading about in thrillers and horror books. But at the
yeah.
same time, for some reason, when it's like in a book, it has to be done just
Mhm.
so in order for it to feel quote unquote believable. You know,
Mhm.
there's a fine line there between like, and it really goes to show how difficult it must be to pull off some things like this as a writer.
Yeah,
Because the
I
stuff
know.
that happens in real life is scarier. It's
Yeah.
scarier than anything
You
you
know,
could.
in a way, I totally agree. Yeah, I know, and that's interesting too, Kelly. I haven't listened to that podcast episode yet, but I do think it would be interesting to get more in the head of Jennifer Hillier and see why she um chose to write certain topics, because I know I do need to listen to that interview too at the end of the the end of the audiobook.
She did say that she put more of herself into this book than she ever has, and especially as far as like the Filipino culture
Hmm.
and things of that nature. So I think she felt like closer to this one than her other books because it felt like it was more, exposing and more vulnerable for her.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to hear. Um, All right. Well, I think that just about wraps up everything that I wanted to talk about for this live show. So, thank you so much to everybody who joined us for this live show today and who read along with us this month. And of course, thank you so much to Elizabeth for
Thank you.
joining. This is so great. Once again, her channel will be linked down below. If you haven't checked out her channel yet, you should definitely go and do so because she does so much fun bookish content that's like, thriller, horror, all of the things. So, so yeah, definitely be sure to check her out. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us.